Dodgy advice and bad decisions can cost you big in real estate. We're here to make sure that that doesn't happen. Welcome to the No BS Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jo Agresta, and it's time to take control of your property journey together. Welcome back, everyone, to the No BS Real Estate Podcast, your listening how-to guide to the Australian financial and real estate market. I'm your host, Jo Agresta, and on today's show, we've got a guest here that is actually making a lot of waves in the property investment space. And I'm not just talking as an investor, but as an educator, mentor, and an advocate for a lot of first-time investors and buyers. Joining us today is Moxin Reza, a name that's become synonymous with smart property investment in Australia. Now, Moxin has built an impressive 16 million property portfolio, starting from humble beginnings while working 2 jobs. He's the founder of the highly engaged Property Investment Australia Facebook community, where thousands of Australians come together to learn, ask questions, and share their home buying journeys. Beyond social media, Moxin is a published contributor to Forbes Business Council, that's where he actually shares expert insights on real estate and investment strategies. He's been featured on the Australian Property Investment Podcast, interviewed on YouTube, and has written extensively about how to increase net worth through property without sacrificing lifestyle. And on top of all that, he also hosts his own podcast, and that is the Help Me Buy Property podcast, where he breaks down real-world strategies to help Aussies succeed in the property market. So in this episode, we'll explore Moxin's personal journey, his strategies for first-time buyers, and some of the most common mistakes people make when entering the property market. So whether you're looking to buy your first home, invest smarter, or simply learn just from one of Australia's most active property mentors, this episode is packed with insights that you won't want to miss. Now, Moxin, what do you think of that intro? Welcome to the show.
Wow. I was like, Jesus, is it ever going to end?
You know, it's really hard when you're talking to a guest who's so well accomplished and has done so
Thank
much.
you. Super humbled.
Of course, like, you have to give the accolades, but you also have to try and summarize it. And it's really hard to do that.
Yes. No, thank you. Really appreciate it. And, thank you for inviting me to the show.
Of course. I was so excited, like I said, Karina, our marketing manager, when she said, you know who you should talk to, it's Moxin. I'm like, okay, can you give me an intro? So when we caught up and, you explained about what you do, I'd already known about you for a while, and I thought, wow, this is a really cool person to interview. And I think anyone tuning in today is going to really enjoy this episode, especially if you're in the space of either about to buy just a first home or you're thinking about investing. I think this is a really good one for first-time investors, in my opinion.
Definitely. We'll have a lot of fun.
I think so. I've got a few cheeky questions, so let's go. So, I guess the journey to property investment success is one of the biggest things that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So, Moxin, your journey from working 2 jobs to building a 16 million property portfolio is incredible.
Yeah.
What initially motivated you to get into property investment, and how did it all begin?
Yeah. And taking a step back, and firstly, everyone sees the success, they don't see the hard work, and everyone looks at the final end game, and they don't look at how hard the road and the journey has been. Look, I was a normal investor. The 3 passions in life other than family was always teaching property and data. So being a data scientist, I was always about evidence-based investing and how do you go around, finding data that validates what you want to do. I think one of the biggest difference between a successful property investor and a property investor who doesn't achieve much is just action, right? It's about making or taking action. And so I think one of the things that I realized quite earlier in the pace was that, okay, I don't have mentors at that time. There's no podcast at that time. There's no YouTube channels at that time. And there was not a lot of waves in property market. There was not a lot of information and data available. And I'm going back 2007, 8, just pre-GFC, right? So, I knew that I had to make a lot of mistakes. But what I was always focused on is how do I identify those mistakes and fix them along the way? And so every time I'll talk to people, they'll buy and they'll hold it forever. And that was the mentality and mindset. And that's why a lot of people would fail, because they'll buy crappy non-investor grade properties without realizing that they are never going to grow and not having the heart or the braveness to go out there and admit that, hey, it was a mistake, I'm going to sell, cut my losses and move on. And I think that was the biggest learning for myself. So when I first started, look, I made, shit ton of mistakes, right? I've written the whole book about, all the mistakes that I've done, right? The Millennial Guide of Property Investing is all about, okay, just don't do these mistakes and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And so, buying apartments, buying house and land packages, buying units, doing stupid things. I've pretty much done everything under the sun when it comes to property investing, using first home buyer grants and, playing with trust and playing with companies and, how do you go around being, passive and active in development. So I've done all of that. The important lesson for me was always about how do you structure your property portfolio in a way that you can do it in a sustainable fashion.
That's important.
It's very, very important. As a first-time investor, property investing almost happens as a residual thinking. It's not structured. Like, you don't think about, okay, I'm going to do this and not going to do this when I'm going to buy properties. And I was basically like any other investor. So, the first property didn't work out. Didn't do much, right area, wrong property. Second property was right property, wrong area.
So you've got to make all these mistakes, but that's part of the journey, right? Like
100%. Yeah, 100%. And as I said, one of the things that I always say this out loud, and this is not me flexing or, trying to be egotistical about it, but it's more about, okay, if I had me when I started my journey, I'll probably be three times size, and I'm not talking physically, I'm talking about my net wealth. But that's the power of education. That's the power of podcasts. That's the power of people like you, bringing so much information out there, and and so if I summarize this, doing 3 jobs was a necessity at that time. The interest rates were at its peak. I started buying when the interest rates were at 9.5%, right? GFC around the corner. My first property, I still remember that, I bought it and GFC happened, and I was like, shit. And I used to work for AIG at that time, and that was one of the companies that was part of this GFC kerfuffle, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, shit, I've got a job that I might end up losing. I've bought a property that I don't know if it's right or wrong, and GFC has happened, and so the market is crashing. Jesus, what did I get into, right?
Yeah. And that must have been really stressful, like especially for your first type of investment.
100%. Yeah, 100%. So and that was the learning, right? So I quickly learned. I think after the third and the fourth property, I quickly learned that, okay, it's about the cash flow. It's not about the growth.
Yeah.
And so how do you go around, fixing some of these things, right? The second biggest mistake that I did at that time, which turned out quite well because that was the silver lining that I talk about all the time as well, is that, I ended up buying a property, I still remember, in Melbourne. That was my pathway towards developments. And I had no idea that, this was a development potential property and I can do a development there. I just, rocked up there. I was living in Sydney at that time, and I just bought, my fourth property at that time. And I met, one of my mentors at that time, and he's like, oh, by the way, do you know that you can hold the house at the front and build 2 at the back? And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's like the world of subdivision.
Yeah, correct. And then, it's such a... of course, you make a lot of money in subdivisions, and don't get me wrong, development is where you make real money. But, there's a fact that 75% of the developers fail in Australia.
Wow.
Right? So it's a big number.
That's a very big number.
Yeah. And so while you can make some serious coin in development, you can lose some serious money to developments as well. So, when I first started my development journey, I was learning all of these things. I was like, wow, this is easy. And no one talks about the bad stuff. Everyone talks about the good stuff.
It's like the positive upside.
Yeah, exactly.
All the money you can make, how it's going to work out.
100%. And so, I went in. Look, I did clear out, close to about 700 because, I bought the house just, for users and listeners' perspective. I bought that house for 650. I sold the front house for about 595. Built 2 units at the back, and they costed me about 600, in total at that time. And I sold each unit at about 740, 730. So I cleared, significant amount of money. But, would I do that at the same time, at the same level again? No, I think that was the biggest mistake. Like, although I made money, because, at that time, the market was at its lowest point. And so the strategy of mine should have been going out there and buying more rather than forcing on development, because I could have done the development any time of the year anyway.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of, I know from historical, right? So I grew up in an Italian family, all about investment, all about property, do the right thing, growth, money. But what we were taught, and I think a lot of people in our same position do this, where we've been taught as a culture that you buy an investment and you keep it, you don't touch it, you hang on to it.
Yes.
Don't do anything
Protect with life. Yes.
Protect with life, pay the mortgage, put a renter in it.
Yeah.
You can sell it in 20 years and that's your retirement plan, right?
Definitely.
And I think that old school mentality, and when I say old school, it's an investment that works for some, but it's a long game. And
yes.
It's a really long retirement plan, basically. It's like, how many properties can you purchase, keep in a portfolio, get to a point where you want to retire and sell all these properties and make money back. That's the idea behind it.
Definitely.
And then you have your renters in there paying off the mortgage. And I think what we're coming into in this age, where I'm talking to people like you, other professionals that do different things like co-living, I know you've played in that space as well, where now there's all these options on how to build these portfolios, get into different types of investment, and actually have a comfortable lifestyle.
Yeah. You don't have to kill yourself in building wealth, right?
That's right. And I think it's all about that balance. And I know you're an advocate for that lifestyle balance.
100%. See, I mean, wealth creation journey, and I call property investment journey as a wealth creation journey, right? You know, that mentality and mindset, I'm going to kill myself today to build, something for retirement, doesn't work anymore, because one thing that COVID has taught us is that life is short and you don't know what's going to happen. And so if you're not improving your lifestyle along the way, then what is it for? Like, I'm against, those 70 and 80 years old driving Ferrari and Maseratis. It's just such a sad thing, right? You should be doing this in your 20s and 30s and 40s, right? And again, like, I'm not trying to be, gender biased or anything like that, right? Good on them, when they're doing that. But the idea of wealth creation is to,
baby.
Yeah, exactly. The retirement is not so much about a point in time; it's a transition in life, right?
Yeah.
And so retirement could be little. It's all about choices, right? It's all about little choices, smaller choices, right? I think one of the things that I say all the time is, one of the first retirement choices that I made was that I would never fly economy when I'm doing domestic flights. Right, and I used to fly, and I was like, it's a small choice, right?
Yeah.
But because I started making my first almost $15,000 in passive income in the first year, I was like, okay, I have enough money to do it, right? And that's the and so these are small choices that I see leading you towards retirement. Retirement is not about earning $200,000 in passive income on day one. It's about how do you get there and how do you get there sustainable.
I actually really like that perspective, because you're so right. I think, like I said, generationally, our parents are teaching us to prepare for that almost end of life stage
when you can't enjoy. I call it the doom days.
The doom days, right? It's like, you have to get ready for the gated community and going to shuffleboard and things like that. But I think, one of the biggest things that a lot of young people and millennials are wanting to understand better is, with the introduction of like crypto and all these other investment spaces that exist, and property being one that is a little bit complex, but there's an ambition.
Definitely.
This lifestyle that comes with it, rather than waiting to enjoy those things. I like the way you've put it, that you make a choice.
Yeah.
Small things. It's like, I don't want to, when I travel domestically, you know what? I actually don't want to be.
I don't want to queue up anymore. That's it, right? It's a small choice. Yeah.
And it's like, it makes it fun, and you can enjoy it while you're young.
Yeah.
And then look back and go, no, I actually don't regret any of the money spent on how I travel.
100%.
Like, that was a really good experience to do at that age, rather than waiting when you're 70 years old and you're sitting in a plane, you're like, man, this would have been really cool when I was like in my 30s or 40s.
Yeah, and taking a partner, taking a wife, taking a girlfriend, flying business, I think, it's a proud moment, right? Because so it's all about those choices, and that's what it comes down to.
No, I love that. That's a really good insight. And, one thing that I love that you've done, because I'm in that Facebook group you've created. So for those that are listening and are going, Facebook group, yes, I'm not joking. It's got like 11,000 members in it.
Yes.
And every time I go into it, I learn so much.
Yeah.
And I'm like, see, this is what I needed. Like, just a community of other people asking the same questions that I have, or asking different things that I need to learn, and then having a group of experts there sitting there answering my questions. And what I like is, part of that community you've built on Facebook, what were the biggest struggles that you see? Because you're monitoring all those questions and all those things that come through.
Yeah.
What's one of the biggest struggles that you see home buyers facing at the moment, or the first-time investors?
I think first-time investors and first-time buyers, their biggest problem is always deposit, right? And so they want to live in an expensive place that they can't afford. And look, I mean, there's nothing wrong in dreaming, right?
Yeah.
But how do you get there is the point, right? So, okay, I can't afford it now, but how do I get there, right? I'll give you a typical example. I have a client who lives in Cranbourne, and they're like, I want to live in Melbourne, right? In 6 years' time or 8 years. So how do I come and live in Melbourne in 8 years' time, right? And that mindset and mentality and that question is always there, right? For a lot of people, because, you know, they might be able to rent now in Melbourne in a 2-bedroom apartment, for example. But, you know, can I sacrifice my lifestyle for 2 years, 3 years, living in Cranbourne, still entering into the property market and then moving my way towards Melbourne, for example? And so that's one of the biggest pain point that I see always with first-time investors and first-home buyers, where do I start? Should I buy a property to live in, or should I rent west? And two, okay, if I'm going down and buying a property to live in, you know, I might be away from work, you know, way further down away from work. So how do I make those calculated choices, right? Where I can still build wealth and still climb the property ladder, knowing that I don't have $1 million to start with. I only have like $50,000 or $80,000 to start with.
Yeah. And what are you kind of, so what's the general guidance that you would give someone, and, you know, asking those types of questions?
See, the first and the most important thing is, where are you in your life right now? So when I say where are you in your life right now, it means that how much risk can you take and what sort of servicing and the borrowing capacity that you have. Because let's agree on a fact, from a base case scenario perspective, you don't have deposit, right? Yeah. So we have agreed on the fact you don't have deposit, but where are you in your life? Are you on a good, you know, income? Can you save well? You know, do you have a risk appetite? You know, you don't have kids, you don't have partner, you know, do you have a better financial discipline? So all of these questions need to be answered in order to understand where do you need to stay. Okay. Right. Because if you have a family and a kid, then naturally the principal place of residence becomes attractive, because you don't want your family to be kicked around, you know, with tenancies and rents and all of that. So you need a bit of stability. You want the kid to go out to a nice school, and that becomes the priority. The wealth creation comes secondary, you know, all of a sudden, right? So those are some of the very important questions that you would need to answer first before you go down the path of understanding whether it's rent vesting or principal place of residence.
And rent vesting is so talked about, especially over the last, I think since COVID, like COVID had sort of started to emerge.
Yeah, definitely.
Now it's become very popular as a concept.
100%.
So for those listening who don't know what rent vesting is, just quick background. It's basically you want to live in a certain location that you like. You can't afford to purchase in that location. So what you do is you purchase in a cheaper, different location, keep that property for a little bit, you rent in the place that you want to live, or that suburb.
Definitely.
And then when you've got enough for a deposit, or that house has made you some wealth or generated some money, you can get rid of it, use the funds to buy in that suburb that you now can afford to do after maybe 2 years, 3 years.
Definitely. There is one more thing, and in relation to rent vesting, that a lot of people miss out on. Is that, you know, I'm choosing not to buy my principal place of residence. I can buy in the area that I'm living in, but I'm choosing not to, because what I'm doing is I'm being a lot more aggressive, and I'm using that servicing towards the investment so that I can create more wealth. Because I know that the area that I'm living in, while I can buy there, that area is not going to grow. So it's not on the growth radar. You know, I love living here, but it's not going to grow. So I'm choosing to rent here because I'm more growth focused, right? So I did rent vesting for almost 7 years, and it's a massive taboo in our culture.
Yeah, I was going to say, in my culture, it's like you rent. It's
people look down. People look down upon you, and I still remember that, you know, I was living in Sydney, and I had like 7 properties at that time, and, you know, one of my aunties, you know, walked in the house, and we had a bit of a housewarming because we were renting, and they're like, "Oh, did you buy this place?" And, you know, they were talking to my wife, and they're like, no, we were renting. She's like, "Oh, you're still renting? You've been here." Like, I was here in Australia for 10 years at that time. And they're like, "God, like, you must be so, like, you know, poor," like, literally, right? That you can't buy, and, you know, you need to have a financial discipline. And look, I'm not one of those people who, you know, beat around the chest and say, "Oh, by the way, I have 7 properties, so, you know, I have more wealth than you." You know, you can't say that to people. That's super rude. But yeah, and so you're going through that sort of, you know, mindset and mentality that, you know, people go down the path of, I'll buy a place to live in, even if it's costing me my lifestyle, just to prove everyone else that, hey, I can do it. Yeah.
And it's do you find with a lot of your clients that you help and that you're mentoring have a lot of hang-ups that have come from either, you know, family or society, that they have this idea of, I can't rent. Like, I cannot imagine filling out a rental application at 30 years old or 40 years old.
I think it's different, right? I think people have this mindset and mentality that renting is dead money and buying a property to live in is not dead money.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that notion in itself is flawed, right? Renting is technically not dead money. It's about managing the cash flow, right? And so the way I explain this to people, that, you know, technically renting is not dead money, because if you move in a place that does not grow, your cash flow changes from, say, $500 a week to like $900 to $1,000 a week. Yeah. And if the property doesn't grow, you have basically moved backwards in your life. And so you're losing more money, right? While still owning your own property. And so you're paying it down, but because the property value is not going up, all you're doing is just intentional saving. You can do that saving while you're renting anyway.
Yeah.
But you can do exactly that, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Because, you know, if you're paying, say, for example, if your mortgage is, you know, $1,000 a week and you were paying rent of $500, out of the $1,000 that you're paying, your principal paid down would only be $200. So you can still do that by paying $500 per week and save $200 on the side.
It's true. Like when I met my partner, I was always amazed that she rented and saved her house deposit. So when I met her, we were a very rare case, because she already had savings, I had savings. Like I'd already made my first investment.
Yeah.
And I said to her, "Oh, so you've got savings?" I said, "But you rent." I said, "How'd you manage that? You must be having noodles for dinner." She's like, "No, I don't." She goes, "I'm just really good with my spending and money." And
financial discipline, right?
Correct. She's got a tremendous financial discipline, and I'm the spender. I'm like, "Nah, let's just risk it. All right, let's put money here." You know, I've got the risk appetite. She's like, "Why would you do that?"
Yes.
But it's interesting that, she managed. I've always admired that fact. And anyone, for that matter, who I've met who said, "No, I managed to save my first deposit while renting."
Yeah. And it's not hard. Like if you're a single person earning, say, $70,000 or $80,000 a year, like, and you're living with your parents, geez, like if you're not saving close to like 40,000-50,000 a year, what are you doing, right? You can still have a really good life and still save $40,000-50,000 pretty good saving.
Can you explain that difference just for anyone who's like, what's the difference?
And I call that saving, right? I call this residual saving, right? So you spend first, and whatever is left behind, you call it saving. Intentional saving is where you make $4,000, you take 3,000 out or 2,000 out, and you say, okay, this is saving. Now this is the money left. I'm going to go out there and manage my life with whatever is left behind. And I'm still comfortable spending $2,000 a month because I don't have rent. I'm living with my parents. I don't need to go out there and, spend stupid and spend on my friends because they're not spending money on me. So it's okay to be selfish sometimes, and that's what it's called, intentional saving. So it's a massive change. You would see that the dynamic changes quite significantly if you do that just over 12 months.
I can imagine, because I've always been an intentional saver, never residual in that case, right? And with residual savings, I think someone like, I've got my two cousins. I like to use my live examples, right?
Yes.
Because they're brothers and they're completely different.
Yeah.
One is an intentional saver. The other one is like totally accidental. He's like, oh, cool, I have an extra 500. All right, I'll do something with that.
Yes.
And my uncle's always the one that says, just give me half your paycheck and I'll save it. Whereas the older brother's like, here you go. He's already got a house deposit. And it's just funny to see those two examples and how intention, when you set that intention, what is available
100%.
is totally awesome. And then when it's residual, it's inconsistent, that you have no idea and you can't track.
Definitely.
So when you meet someone who's younger, like what's the youngest person that you think that you've managed?
The youngest client that I have right now is an 18-year-old. So she's just turned 18 2 months ago. And she's come in with a $50,000 deposit that she has saved between 15 and 18 years old, just because she has a financial discipline. Yeah. She works 2 jobs, one in Macca's and the other one as an admin in a medical receptionist. So
that's so
amazing.
Awesome. That's incredible way.
And she doesn't need to, by the way, because her dad is a surgeon and her mom is a gynecologist. So she does not need to. She can be as granted as she wanted to. Like, she could be, super granted child if she really wanted to, right?
Yeah, and she can take that.
Yeah.
Her parents,
100%, right?
Security, she doesn't need to. That's really. I like to ask that question to you because I think the younger society, it's very hard. Like I did a presentation at a high school, and a lot of them know what property is. They know they have one, but they're not thinking about the wealth behind a home.
Yes, exactly.
They're being taught you need to buy your first home when you have a partner. You move out after you've found your partner.
Definitely.
Then you can have children. It's like you've got all these milestones that you have to hit in a certain sequence. So I like the idea that no, you can create wealth from as young,
of course,
as old as you want, but it can be done.
Yeah.
And I want to go, I want to switch gears just a little bit, because one of the things that I like that you do, apart from all your mentorship, which I think I'm definitely going to book in, by the way. I know I'm an advocate by trade, but like I always find that when you buy for yourself, regardless, it's so much harder when you're in the
Oh,
trade
100%. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you look at things from so many angles. You
Yeah,
feel like you
definitely.
overthink it, and then when you've got someone like you said, like a mentor or someone that just comes on with you and says, "No, okay, let's take this
Yeah,
step
take
by
a step
step."
back. Yeah, and breaking things down. I think it makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why I really like this
Mm.
conversation we're having, because a lot of people I think listening are going, okay, I could take the learnings that I'm hearing right now and get started potentially or start a conversation, but I'm hoping that what they do or what you guys listening will do is actually reach out to Moxin or his team and start this
Yeah,
conversation, because
definitely.
it can take you a long way. One chat can change everything. So you've written extensively about building wealth through property without sacrificing lifestyle. What do you think are, or what are the key principles behind that approach?
So when you're talking about building wealth sustainably without sacrificing lifestyle, it needs to be done in a structured fashion. I call it a few method, and the few method is all about structured investing. You know, how do you go around investing when you are a first-time investor or a foundational investor? How do you increase your risk appetite into what I call is experience investing or expedition stages of property investing? And then if the need be and if the choice is, how do you go around doing high net worth investing or be in those, you know, higher echelons where you are creating a business out of property, right? Because ultimately you can build an empire and a business out of property as well, right?
Of course.
And so that transition of, you know, foundational and expedition is what I call it is passive investing, and high net worth investing, what I call it is active property investing. Okay.
Right.
Now, if I take a step back and explain this whole sort of structured way of investing, there are three key ingredients to all of this, you know, and in a very basic term, right? For anyone who's out there, the three key ingredients as an investor would always be your yield. So what sort of rent are you getting out of each of the property? Your growth as to how quick this property is going to grow. And third is relation to the manufacturer returns. So what can you do to the property right now that is going to increase its value? Okay. Those three key ingredients are the ingredients that you require at different stages of property investing. So as a foundational investor, your focus needs to be growth and short-term growth, not just growth. So it's not like buy, hold it forever.
Yeah.
You want to buy as close to the growth curve as possible, because we all know property does not grow in linear fashion.
That's right.
You know, you would get 20% growth in the first year and then 30% and then no growth for the 3 years, right?
That's true.
So if you've got 50% growth, sell, move out, bring the money back, do it again, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm that sort of aggressive and of that mindset and mentality, because don't be scared of tax and managing the tax side of things. Because if you're scared of taxes, then don't even work, because you pay taxes when you're working as well, right? So don't work, right? You know, start begging or, you know, run a charity or an NGO, you know. So don't be scared of tax. Paying tax means that, you know, you're earning more money, yeah?
Yeah, of course. I think, and you know, that's interesting, because the other strategy that you've talked about before, and it's becoming more popular once again, is co-living to
Yes.
boost rental returns.
Yes.
Right? Can you explain how that works and why it's an effective strategy?
And co-living is an important piece out of the whole puzzle, right? So as an advanced investor, and when you talk about expedition property investing, your focus would always be cash flow and manufacturer returns. You don't really care about growth, because you understand the importance of cash flow. As an avid investor, I look at my property portfolio and I want to chase cash on cash returns of 20% every year. I don't care whether the market is growing or the market is going down or people are crying, people are laughing. I have zero interest on where the market is heading. What I would care about is how do I grow my property portfolio by 20% on cash basis every year. Okay, so it's I dumb it down quite a lot. You know when I'm talking about high net worth investing. In co-living space, the focus is on manufacturer returns and on cash flow. So what you're doing is, instead of renting out the whole house, you're renting out rooms. Now, this is not a new concept, by the way. It's a concept that people were doing in 80s as well, right?
But it's just now being talked about.
Yes,
because everyone's, I think, negatively geared their properties for so long to offset tax.
100%, yeah.
Now we're coming into this time of, hey, did you know you can positively gear a property?
Yes.
And co-living's a really good strategy.
Yes,
for that.
also that the bank's risk appetite was never there. And so anyone who was doing co-living before, they had to do it from their own pocket. So you need handsome amount of money for you to either build a custom designed co-living property, or, spending money on converting into a, co-living property, right? So, people who were doing co-living, they were doing it silently, under the radar, not talking about it, and I have clients who have, amassed a $30 million property portfolio, and it's all co-living, right? Nothing other than that, right? And it makes total sense because these property, because they're commercially valued, they would grow on average by 4.5% to 5% every year because the rent goes up by 4.5% to 5% every year, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
And so, they're attached to the rental income and the cap rate, and they'll automatically grow. You don't have to do anything, And of course, the land value, intrinsic land value goes up all the time. I have this client, who built a co-living property in Carlton for their kids,
right?
Paid off that property, and their generational wealth or the grandkids now hold on to that property, and it's valued at $13 million. And this is like 1980 that they built that co-living property, right? So it's not a new concept, it's a really old concept. It's just about making sure that you can execute it well. A lot of people go down the path of trying to execute co-living, and they end up putting poor quality tenants, and becomes a drug house or boarding houses, or there's a lot of negative connotation attached. There's a reason, because it does end up becoming that if you don't manage it properly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a bit of risk involved,
of course,
and screening that goes into it, because it is a shared space
between
whoever those tenants are. And like you said, drugs
can
be a very real problem.
It's so funny, like when we were doing this for the first time in Adelaide, and like the councils in Adelaide had no idea as to what co-livings are. They've heard about boarding houses, and we do it in every state now. I remember having Okaparinga Council asking me whether I'm building a brothel, and I was like, wait, what? They're like, well, you have 9 bedrooms and 9 bathrooms, so it can't be a house, it has to be a brothel. And I was like, no, it's not a brothel.
The 9 bathrooms kind of suggest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, and so we had to show him the plans from Melbourne. I was like, no, these are nice houses that, we want to, almost like macro apartments where, you're fully furnishing them and you're providing them everything under the sun in a single house, in a single room, right? So, of course, when he looked at the pictures, like, it's too good for a normal house. So, funny story.
I like that. That's very funny. Yeah, just be careful, anyone listening. If you are going to go into living, you may be questioned. Maybe not these days. And, you've shared insights in Forbes Business Council quite a bit, about property investment strategies. What's one lesson from your Forbes articles that maybe first-time investors should take away?
Yeah. Look, I resonate with people with low deposits a lot, right? Because I've seen that side of things. While I have this massive spectrum of clients who are 18 years old to like 16 years old, who are CEOs and CFOs and the CEOs of major brands, right? I say this out loud to them as well, that, people who have money, it's easy for you to make money. It's people who don't have money, it's hard for them to make money. And that's why I resonate with them a lot more, right? And I provide a lot of the advice to them, and I try to dedicate a lot more time towards them. Real estate for women or cash flow real estate is dedicated towards helping people lift up the game in property investing. The biggest advice that I say to people is, number one, is take action. Okay, don't wait for there's always market within market. All you need is $50,000 to $70,000 to step into the market, right? So don't wait for that, $200,000, $150,000 deposit. I bought my first property when I had $30,000 in my bank account, right? Yeah. So you can enter into the market with as little deposit as possible. These days, government incentives where there is 2%, 5% schemes are amazing opportunities for you to enter into the market, right? And I'll talk about a particular client example, because then people will resonate a lot more with this. Sure. So I had this particular client, they had about, $70,000 to $80,000, and they're like, okay, we are going to use this to buy an investment property, but we really like St Kilda and we want to buy something in St Kilda to live in as well, right? Now, of course, if you go out there and buy a house in St Kilda, 80,000 is not going to cut it. No. So they're like, okay, so how do we not sacrifice our lifestyle? We don't want to rent, we still want to buy, but, I'm keen on getting, the investment radar as well, right? And so the interesting bit was this, right? So the way I suggested the cycle to them was this, that, okay, you have, $80,000, your good savings level, you'll bring up that, 80,000 again in say 1.5 years time again. Okay, how about, we aim for an apartment, okay? And this is what they suggested, because they were living in an apartment, right? And we all know apartments is the shittiest product, it never grows in value. Yep. And so you should never buy an apartment purely from an investment perspective, right? But his strategy was slightly different, because one, it needs to respond to his lifestyle. Yeah. And two, he does not want to move around because he wanted to live in a place. And Melbourne's rental prices are really, really bad right now.
Yeah.
So he ended up, acquiring this apartment for $450,000 at 2% deposit.
Wow.
Okay, which is like literally nothing, right?
It's nothing.
And the rent that he was paying was exactly the same amount of money that he was paying for the mortgage. And so there is no cash flow difference that we talked about before.
Yeah.
And he lives in that apartment 9 months. So between January to September, October, he lives there. And October, November, December, he Airbnbs it out. So for those 3 months, he makes a shit ton of money to pay for the whole year's mortgage, because that apartment rents for almost like 200 to 250 a night between, October to December, right?
Of course it does.
Yeah. And so the amount of money or the cash flow that they generate from that property is significantly to pay off the mortgage, right? So they'll pay off that mortgage for the apartment probably like 7 to 10 years max, right?
Yeah.
Through, doing that strategy. So their saving levels have gone through the roof by just doing that, right? Now, the question that people would ask is, oh, by the way, what about the capital gains tax? Because he's running the business out of his principal place of residence. Hey, we already agreed the apartments are not going to grow in value. So there is no capital gains tax, right?
Yeah.
So we know for a fact that, even if the apartment grows in value, he's made enough, on the side through the cash flow side of things, that the cash flow impacts would be almost next to none. And then whatever was left was what we used to basically go in and still acquire an investment property, right? It's a perfect strategy for a person who is a bit more aggressive, who wants to basically start at both fronts. And we ended up acquiring a property for around 350, 370, in regional pocket. And interesting, like this is a 6 months old story. That property has gone to almost about, I think, 500 with the latest valuation. So they've made almost $100,000 on that property already. Jeez. And so they're ready to basically come back in and acquire the third property, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good, I like when you talk in examples, because it's easier to visualize.
Yes,
I
correct.
think for anyone listening.
So it's an amazing strategy where you're using government grants to buy something, to not sacrifice your lifestyle, plus you're still going into the route of investments, and you're doing it in a way that, you scale up your property portfolio quite quickly.
No, that's extremely valuable. This has been so valuable, Moxin. And the last, couple of things I need to talk about here is I want to switch it up just a bit.
Yes.
So you've worked with so many buyers and investors, right?
Yes.
What's the most bizarre or unexpected thing you've ever seen in a property transaction?
Okay. I think the one that always sticks me, and we laugh about it now, but I wasn't definitely laughing about it at that time, was we were buying a property for a particular client, and she knows I talk about this on all the podcasts, and she's allowed me to do this.
Nice.
She's one of my most beautiful clients, living out of Sydney. We bought, we were starting off the journey of a property investment journey, and, she had a lot of apartments that we had to sell to cut out the losses, right? So it was a terrible property portfolio. And so the interesting fact with this particular client, she had 4 apartments over the last 10 years.
Right.
And we bought 3 properties in the last 1 year. And those 3 properties have done, I think, 3 times the growth that apartments have done over the last 10 years.
Makes sense.
It's just crazy, right? It's crazy numbers, right? Anyway, so the first property that we bought for this particular client, or I think it was the second property in Adelaide, it was a beautiful property in Aldinga Beach. A great rental yield. You can subdivide this, build something at the back. Everything was awesome. There was a granny already at the back. So, you could generate double rent out of this. It was priced at around 500 or 480 or 470 at that time. And so, we were going through the settlement, the valuation came on point, etc. And our property manager was going and doing a final inspection of the property 3 days before the settlement. And they rocked up to the property, and then I get a call at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I still remember Nicole saying to me, Moss, the property is burning. And I was like, oh, it's a small fire, so just put it out, right? She's like, no, this is not like, like a bin fire. This is like the property is burned down. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she took me on a video call, and I could see fire brigades everywhere, and the property was literally burning. I was like, holy shit, like,
shit.
Like, and like, I've never been through that scenario before. And that was an interesting conversation, right? So we always tell our clients, look, when you sign the contract, buy the insurance, we provide them with the codes, etc., everything, right? A lot of Sydney-siders take this very, very lightly, right? So they'll be like, I'll buy the insurance when the property is settled. I don't need to worry about this. And so I could see the property burning. I said to Nicole, look, hang up. We'll sort out your mess. You go home, because you can't inspect anything, a burning property.
It's burnt down.
Yes, pretty much. And so I called my client, and she's very excited. She's like, oh, the settlement is coming in 3 days. I was like, yeah, I don't think so. That's what I keep saying into my head. And I asked her the first question, did you ended up buying that insurance? And she's like, oh no, I'm going to sort it out today. I was like, shit. By the way, your property is burned down. And like, she freaked out.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah? Because, she's an avid investor, but no one wants to hear that, their property is burned down 3 years before the settlement, or 3 months before 3 days before the settlement.
Yeah.
Anyways, long story short, we came out of that contract, we got the deposits back, etc. They tried to basically pin it on us, saying, hey, it's your fault. But they put the tenant in without letting us know. And so, we fought the case, won everything, got the deposit back. But we still ended up buying that property.
What, after the repairs?
No. So, that person did not have insurance on it. He had a bank debt of about 250. We paid him 300,000 to just buy the property as is in that condition.
So it actually worked out better.
Yeah, and we took the house down and subdivided it and basically still went ahead with it. So not for that particular client, by the way. I did it myself because I didn't want the client to go through that same scenario and, all that, stress again. But it worked out beautifully. But, you had to think on the feet and try to navigate through some of these things, making sure that, you're not exposing the clients. And the trust played a big part in it because, the house was placed in a trust, so there was no liability, from a client's perspective. They kept forcing her to settle. We didn't settle. We defaulted on the settlement because we said, well, there's nothing to settle.
I can't even do a final.
So, it comes down to, making sure that, you listen to your advisors, what they're saying. There's a reason and a logic behind that. And good advisors stick around to the end, right? They don't just, buy and disappear in thin air, right?
That's right. And I think that's when you've got the wrong person working with you. When it gets tough, they leave.
Yes.
And they go, oh, sorry, I don't know what to do now.
So we had a lot of fun even during that as well. And, she was stressing out. I was like, no, don't worry. It's all good. You have it under control. So, yeah. Well done. It's a good story.
It's a great story. I'm actually very happy I asked the questions. Look, to wrap up here, you've given great advice. Thank you so much again for your time. I think one of the things I've been asking every one of our guests, because I like to pinpoint time, like when these podcasts are released and these episodes, it's always interesting to know where the market's at that point. So now that I've got 5 years of history, I can see where predictions, go. So my question is, the property market's always changing, as you know. What trends do you see shaping the Australian housing market if you looked at it for the next 1 to 5 years?
Yeah. Look, I think the disparity that the wealth creation is creating is massive, right? I strongly believe that people who are jumping into the property market right now, give 5 to 10 years, the market would be so far-fetched that no one is going to talk about first-home buyers, right? Yeah. This granted notion of, hey, you need to look after first-home buyers is going to go out of the door. And there are various reasons behind this, right? You look at any of those successful economies, property travels through generational wealth. It comes through inheritance. There is no first-home buyers. You talk about Hong Kong, Singapore, London.
That's true.
It's always about, okay, I'm going to get a property through inheritance through my parents, right? And so a lot of that is going to come through here as well, right? And so it would be so far-fetched that people would rent and they'll wait for the property inheritance to come through and they might end up buying one, and those property travels through generations. So it's all about action for the next sort of 5 to 10 years, right? The other biggest thing that is happening that a lot of people don't pay attention to, that media would start talking a lot about, is what they are calling it is the great wealth transfer. So this great wealth transfer is where baby boomers are passing on their wealth, and it's, I think, the last number that I heard was like $150 trillion of money transferred from baby boomers to Gen X and Gen Y, right?
Wow.
And so when you look at that transition, the amount of money that is going to come through Gen X, and if they are student smart and if they go aggressive and buy more properties and hold more wealth, that disparity of wealth is going to become so massive that people who are not entering into the market, they would have no hope of entering into the market, right?
Yeah.
There is a really simple way of looking at this, right? Property market, why does property market never goes down, right? When you think about property market, it's the market where everyone is vouching for the market to go up, right? Even like first home buyers want the market to go up. They only want the market to be low when they are buying. Once they bought the property, they're like, oh, go up. Yeah. So in the market where like more than 95% of the people are looking and vouching for the market to go up, where do you think the market is going to go, right? So it's that, so there is a massive Uberization of property industry that is happening whether it's major institutional investors, superannuations, other venture capitalists who are coming in into a build to rent models, and they're building this at scale. And that would be the game changer for people who are looking at this from a wealth creation perspective. The next 10 years is going to be, it would be a game changer for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good insight. I think that's probably one of the most different insights we've had. I love it. I think that's a good perspective. That's why I like to ask. And look, you've shared so much valuable advice today. To wrap up, where can our listeners follow your work and learn more about what you do?
Sure. Look, we have a very omni-channel approach, so you can always jump on our social. So on YouTube, you can search my handle at Moxin.Reza. We have a Facebook group called Property Investment Australia. We have our Instagram, our Help Me Buy Property podcast. I have my own book called The Millionaire's Guide to Property Investing. So anywhere you touch, you would always come to, some way, shape or form. But I always put my hand up and say, look, if you are in need of help, ping me. You can always reach out to me directly at moss@helpmebuy.com.au. And I'm always happy to, allocate some time and effort to basically help you out. It's like, I don't do this just for the sake of money. Like, I have enough in my piggy bank to, not care about it. But I truly want people to make evidence-based decisions. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to other people. There is heaps of profit gurus out there. Follow evidence-based investing. Make sure that you're following the data, because data never lies.
I love that. That's fantastic. Thanks, Moxin.
Thank you.
This has been, like I said, such an insightful conversation. Thank you for breaking down these strategies and giving our listeners a clearer path to property ownership, and I think other options as well.
Thank you.
So for anyone looking to buy their first home or grow their property portfolio or start a property portfolio, you can connect with Moxin, like he said, through his various channels. We'll put those in our episode notes, in our show notes at the bottom. You can connect and go for it. All the links will be there. And of course, tune into his podcast, Help Me Buy Property Podcast. I've listened to a couple of episodes. Really awesome. I enjoy it.
Thank you for having me here today, Jo.
Of course. It was so good. And look,
it's fun.
I'm glad you had fun. That was my question. I'm like, did you have fun? Were the questions all right?
No, definitely. It was definitely a lot of fun. Yes.
I'm so glad. And I know that people tuning in definitely will get a lot out of this, because what I'm hoping we achieve, with different guests, is inspiring people to, if you're listening on the drive home or on the ride to work, or maybe you're doing, you're cleaning in the kitchen, or you're cleaning up the house.
Definitely.
Or you're just tuning out from kids. It's you want to learn something, and
definitely
this has given you a bit of inspiration. I think you've been such a wise and inspirational guest to have here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the insight.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. We'll see you next time on the No BS Real Estate Podcast. That's a wrap for this episode of the No BS Real Estate Podcast, powered by Abodi AI. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need it. If you're looking for more guidance on your home buying journey, you can visit www.abodi.com.au for expert advice, property insights, and the tools you need to find the right home with confidence. If you're already on your journey, you can also download our app. Just search Abodi AI on the App Store or Google Play. Have any questions or want to connect, you can follow us on Instagram at abodi.com.au or send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.